All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. If it's your first time, welcome. If you've been here all day, thanks for hanging in with us. And we have a great session to wrap up the day and something I think lots of us are interested in the world of festivals. And so we're going to get started by introducing our panelists today. I will just hand the mic over and ask them both to talk a little bit about their roles and how it relates to the ecosystem of festivals. We'll start with Kaajal. I said I could say it, and then I didn't say it. I'm going to say Kaj. I'm going to say hello, Kaj. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Yeah. So I'm Kaj. I originally am from Jersey, but I'm living out in the Bay Area in California now. I currently work at Goldenvoice, and kind of got my start in the industry doing lots of different jobs within marketing as well as like production for festivals and concerts. Yeah, my current job is Goldenvoice. So I work as our creative content manager. So I work on a lot of our like photographers and videographers, as well as all of our social media and creative and managing what that looks like from a venue side as well as a festival side. Goldenvoice operates as an LA office and a San Francisco office. So we have Portola Music Festival up in San Francisco, and we primarily work on that one.
Thank you, Kaj. Appreciate it. And then we have Jen Stiles. Jen, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Great. Hi, I'm Jen Stiles. I'm the Director of Festivals and Events at Founders Entertainment. We are the promoters and producers of Governor's Ball Music Festival and also a newer show, Sound on Sound Music Festival. I primarily work on the states in the East Coast, so opposite of Kaj. I've been with Governor's Ball since the first year and with Founders Entertainment since then in 2011. I started my career in Boston working for Don Law's office, a more traditional venue concert promoter who went through, various iterations of Clear Channel Entertainment and then eventually Live Nation, and have a relationship now with Live Nation through Governor's Ball as well as a joint venture with them. I did some freelancing for a few years in the middle of my, the past 25 years of my career, and worked with a media team on the Volvo Ocean Race, traveling around the world. And then the past couple of years, I've also been working over in Germany and Saudi Arabia and Morocco with various events, the Drone Racing League or F1, or Middle East festivals, concerts, and the Oasis Festival. So a lot of like temporary live production.
It sounds super fun. I'm like, hey, I want to learn more about that because that sounds like a great career pathway. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. It's amazing how quick this time goes by. So want to jump in. I see somebody said Governor's Ball was their first festival ever. So great to have you joining us, Gabriella. And we'll dig in a little bit more around what it takes to put on a festival like Governor's Ball. And so I'm not sure that it was picked up, but Kaj, you focus on sort of promotion and marketing content for these festivals and events. So would love to hear from you. What are some... Oh, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Let me just... Is it me? Do you hear it? Okay, there we go. All right. I'd love to know from your perspective, like, what is the bulk of your work? Like when these festivals are coming together, how far out are you planning from a festival, your marketing strategies? Who are you working with? What teams are you part of or interacting with as you plan? Obviously, right? You're getting ready to throw a party and you want to make sure everybody comes to the party. So can you talk to us a little bit about essentially how you advance for festivals?
Yeah. So the festival life cycle is different for every festival. Some festivals are doing year-round marketing where as soon as the festival ends, they, announce a headliner for the next year, or they, go on sale with certain types of tickets. And then some take like a hiatus for like 3 to 6 months or more, and then start doing festivals or festival marketing like 6 months out before the event. So super different for every festival. But regardless of that, you're working with the same team. So, from launch, you're working really closely with the booking team and making sure that you're executing everything they want coming out from the artist side. So you're working with talent teams, booking teams, as well as like all of the artist management teams and agencies involved. A lot of that is getting like creative approved and developing the brand if it hasn't yet already been established, and then kind of optimizing all of your content that relates to the brand. So yeah, your first kind of steps is that branding and booking phase and lineup announce and then take it on sale. So you're working with those teams really closely in tandem to kind of the more on sale period. You're working with ticketing really closely and making sure you're tracking all of the correct data and making sure from their end it's a really great like customer experience. I'm sure everyone has sat in queues and all of that jazz. So, we try our best to get around that and get ahead of that, especially on the festival side. And it's a little bit of like a slower trickle with festivals. So we don't run into that issue as often. But yeah, that's kind of on sale period. Then you have like your maintenance period in the in between where you're working with pretty much everyone. You often work really close with artist teams just to get some more eyes on the event and kind of come up with creative solutions for how to promote the event. And then you work with community partners, usually locally if your festival doesn't have a big pull from all across the country, to really like make that experience personalized for fans. So all of that kind of then ties into the more like production period where you're working really closely with everyone who's going to be on site, production teams, kind of advancing everything for all of your content capture, so photo, video, and then any of the press that you're going to have on site and all of that jazz. So you pretty much work with every team throughout the course.
Sounds like it.
And yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything there.
Thanks, Kaj. I do want to follow up as you were talking about like building brand or pushing the brand if it's an established brand. How much of that is considered year over year? And I think already you both have mentioned festivals that folks know and they've been around for a while. Is it the maintenance of a brand, or is it how do we keep it fresh? Do we need to refresh? What does that internal conversation look like from your perspective?
Yeah, Jen can definitely speak to Gov but I know for our bigger festivals, we've got Coachella, right, which has a super established brand. But with that being said, every year there's a lot of work done into like how the different types of parts of Coachella, because there's so much that goes into it, are going to be announced and how that fits into the brand. Our team works really hard to like elevate the brand with Coachella every year, whether that be integrating, newer tech or newer sponsors or things that are relevant to the audience. Like this year, it was really global and the whole like perspective behind it and the whole like concept behind the balloons and all of that was to like showcase how global the lineup was and how involved that Coachella was in bringing that diversity to the festival space. So I think every year you kind of sit down, look at the past year, look at what did well, what didn't do well, and then you go into creative and brand and identifying kind of your pain points and successes.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we're putting a pin in it and we're going to come back. Jen, so in your role, when you're preparing for, let's say a Gov Ball, when does it start? When does it end? When does it amp up? When do you feel like running, screaming up the door? Or are there ever those moments? Or is it, a well-oiled machine that is predictable and you're able to sort of just maintain throughout the cycle?
Yeah, great questions. GovBall is not predictable because we move a lot. So we've moved locations throughout New York City, and really every time, 5 times I would count it by now. And every time you move, it's really reinventing the show. And so those development years are definitely the hardest. They're the busiest because there's none of your answers are typically do it how we did it last year. That worked well. You're really starting from scratch. So that's unique to GovBall and sort of the landscape in New York City and mass gatherings, major events, and the Parks Department. But in the cycle of start and end. I think we can focus on, we really look at what is the show when we're going, artist booking period starts. The first, who are the artists, how many stages, what stages, and that, also ties into the site layout. And then it sort of dominoes from there. Those like really top line details when artist booking is happening probably 9 to 12 months before the show. And then I would say the 5 to 6 months prior to the show are the busiest with, maybe 45 days out from the show is really a lot of our busiest time. So that we're, getting everything I's dotted, T's crossed for our final permitting in New York City, which is a big checkpoint for us. And then you kind of take a breath those 2 weeks before you start loading, and then you are on site. So really, it's for GovBall being at the beginning of June, we would kick off a lot in early January, and then April is probably the thickest time for production and site production.
And so I think that your role might have a level of opaqueness that I want to dig into a little bit more. So when you talk about dotting I's and crossing T's, it's sounding to me a bit like there's a lot of the logistical pieces that you're pulling together and the less sexy stuff, right? That makes the show run smoothly. But can you share a little bit more like what those I's and T's are for you in the festival space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty wide range if we think about the different departments on site, from the security personnel, making sure that is adequately, the coverage is there for every gate, every RFID scanning portal. Less sexy things. I joke a lot about, we spend a lot of time on fencing and porta potties, and that's sort of the world that we live in. And down to is where are these road cases for this stage being stored? Is there enough space in this area? Like really like finite details that we're looking into, so that on a show day when you're operating a festival site, a festival stage, there's room for everything. It's all flowing on schedule. Schedules are really important, obviously, for a patron experience. But power distribution, water distribution, tent staking, tent ballasting. All of those, it's a lot of details that we're looking at. And then this whole safety aspect, I mentioned security deployment, but there's also all of the engineering to make sure, we're looking at the wind ratings and we're doing our inspections. And those, engineers are looking to say, yes, this is built to spec, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting. And again, it's all those things we don't think about, but y'all imagine a festival without porta potties, right? Or imagine not knowing where to go to get your ticket scanned, or being at an event with weather and not feeling safe or secure. So, these are all really important pieces. And so again, as I listen to you, I'm hearing like municipalities, you've got to look at local codes and rules. You mentioned bring engineers coming into these spaces, and there's some HR component to this, right? In the fact that you've got to get staffed up in security, et cetera. Who are you interacting with regularly, say in the month or two leading up to the show? Like, who are your main collaborators as things are coalescing?
Yeah, the people that I work with most closely on a day-to-day basis are our production directors and managers across stages from a technical perspective, our site directors and managers, that's anything off-site or off-stage infrastructure, our operations team who are covering things like comms across video screens, signage, and general like flow of site, concessions, and our crowd management and safety team. So those, I think those are probably the biggest, if I had to put them into silos, those are the people I'm talking to on the most regular basis, in addition to everyone from the city. And so in New York in particular, sets a really high standard for permitting and really even just like interagency communication. And so those meetings are held pretty regularly, and that's everything from fire department, police department, buildings department, TBTA, bridge and tunnels, DOT, OEM, DOH, DOH state, DOH city, the Department of Health. And there's a lot of acronyms mixed in there. There's probably almost 30 entities that we interact with within the city to present continuing plans and then those final plans. Yeah.
So how does that shift when you do an international tour, you or festival? You talked about doing some festivals in the Middle East, and so how does that approach? Does it shift much, or is it same kind of thing in a different setting?
Yeah, it really depends on the location. You know, the work that we've been doing in Saudi Arabia, there wasn't so much of an events industry established there just due to the history of that region. And so they're adopting a lot of UK practices. And so a lot of the health and safety standards are coming from the UK and the Purple Book in the UK. And then they've identified that as best practice. And so that's what we're leaning into. And then in some places, you know, I've worked, they might have their own local codes that they're applying, and it's just about talking to whoever your main, you know, local point of contacts is, whether that's like tourism bureau or however your event is sort of coming in, to get those contacts and then figure out what are the standards. And then, you know, as event professionals, I think we look at them and say, we like this standard, or let's, you know, increase the standard, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Noted. So I feel like this is a good time. I typically will save this towards the end, but because you both are coming at the festivals from very different spaces, I'd like to ask you both, like, what do you think are the core skills that you bring to your role that are making you successful? Like I could certainly take some guesses here, but Kaj, what do you think it is? Like, what is your skill set that makes you successful in the marketing and promotion of festivals?
From my side, it's definitely a combo of just data and creative. So it's really being able to, anyone can like pull a spreadsheet of data that Facebook spits at you, but it's really being able to figure out what that means and how to change it for your next week of marketing and being really on top of that. So I think being data driven is super important. That goes into everything from email, SMS, social ads, traditional marketing, like every component of that, being really on top of the data there and knowing how to look at it and have positive results from it, even when it's maybe not showing the sales that your team is looking for on daily counts, right? So knowing that, and then be like really knowing your audience and knowing how to gear your creative towards that audience. We work a lot on Goldenvoice, especially up in the Bay Area, at just figuring out like what niche demographics really like and what kind of creative they see. And a lot of that ends up being like weird meme content. So like sometimes I'm just sitting looking for memes for 3 hours a day, which is crazy. So, which is like the opposite of the data stuff. Like the data stuff is super like brain heavy. And then there's like that other side of it where that'll perform way better than something that I'm like, this has all the numbers behind it. So I think both of those are really important. And just being like a team player, being nice to everyone, all of that jazz.
Yeah, I think being nice is often underrated. Like it's a super important skill. You're very right and left brained in this role, seems, yeah?
Yeah, I would say so, which I enjoy. Some people hate it, but
Excellent. And Jen, again, I feel like hearing you talk, like, clearly organized, proactive, or these are some of the things I'm hearing as you speak. But what would you attribute your success to in this position? And you've got some longevity here, so you've really honed your skills.
Yeah, I think being detailed and tracking those details is really important. Like I can't estimate or under support the amount of like admin that goes into our jobs, and it's like really crucial, and supports all of the work we do, you know, that the workflows we create or the documentation we create for, because you know, we're starting with a smaller core team of leadership, but we're pushing this information out or distributing it to a huge team on the ground, include, you know, even just workflow. If you think of just our security team, we have to create workflows and training that we can, you know, offboard in, you know, 40 minutes to 1,000 people or something like that. But also like being curious is a really important part of the job. And I think like being a learner, you know, festivals are always looking for something new. They're, you know, what's different, I think, and what I love about festivals compared to maybe venue life is that we're reinventing ourselves all the time and what it means to come to a festival or what a festival experience is. And, you know, when we want to do something new, you know, thing I tell my team members all the time is like, get on the phone with this person and then ask every question you can think about. And then apply that to like, what does that mean? So for example, you know, at Sound on Sound, we have a new amusement this year. Something I've actually never worked with, a Ferris wheel. And it seems pretty straightforward, but then I got on the phone with 3 other festivals, and the feedback I got from those different 3 festivals with 3 different audience demographics of how their Ferris wheel operates. I mean, it's probably like 12 hours of R&D has already gone into something like a Ferris wheel, and it looks like a Ferris wheel with some bike rack. But it's surprising the amount of things. But, you know, being curious in those conversations and asking a lot of questions will then help us. You know, we'll learn from that and apply it to our shows. And I think that goes into a lot of our, you know, even into changing how you do toilets. If, you know, if you're asking someone a lot of questions of how they did the plumbing or something, it's really going to give you the best outcome then later when you're, you know, installing that and implementing it on site.
Yeah, I think that's a nice segue too, like the importance and the leaning into creating experiences that have sustainability and limit the environmental impact that the festival has on the community are so important. And so how do your roles, so I don't know if there's a marketing component to it to feature like that we're doing eco-friendly work in this space, and from that logistics perspective, like how does sustainability and eco-friendly practices impact the way that you approach your work, and how has it shifted if it has at all? And I think I'll go to you first, Jen, and then to Kaj.
Yeah, it's shifted a lot in the past 5 to 6 years. There's so many opportunities to apply sustainability now that didn't used to exist. You know, for a long time it was recycling and landfill, and then it was, depending on the market you're in, if they had the resources locally, recycling and landfill and compost. And now there's just so many new opportunities out there, you know, reusable cup programs or canned water. And, you know, we're looking at back of house practices as well as front of house. And that's even changed, where for a long time, this was a front of house initiative. And now we're like, we need to apply that back of house too. You know, if we're serving, you know, no single use plastic front of house, like that needs to be happening in our catering back of house as well. And so, you know, that's something that is really still like growing within the festival space. And then, you know, even looking at your creative projects, you know, temporary art projects that, you know, tremendous effort and material go into for a 3, 4, whatever day experience. And looking at, you know, how can we use those materials again, but reimagine this installation? Because, you know, we want to bring something new to patrons, but also like there's a lot of waste in art. And so where's the balance there? But I think the greatest thing I've seen in sustainability is that our teams are also just personally invested in that. And so everyone is thinking about that. We actually, you know, on the art topic, had an art idea last year, and it was the actual artist that was like, you know, I'm just not comfortable with this and I'm going to shift it, and looked at using different materials because it was like their own like personal initiative, which is great. And we support that. So
yeah, interesting. What about you, Kaj? Do you leverage those features of a festival in marketing strategies or in some of your activation approaches?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, we would have all that info beforehand, but a lot of the times that happens in the like final month before the festival, right? Like all of that planning goes into it, but you don't really have the like metrics to put out until closer to the festival, which by that point there's a lot of other stuff that's got to get pushed out. So on the marketing side, we don't touch it as heavily. We'll still definitely like include things on the web, and it also depends on what type of festival. Like I used to work on Tortuga Music Festival, which is on the beach. So they have a ton of initiatives. They partner with like the people who founded Tortuga, also founded a nonprofit called Rock the Ocean. So their entire like mission is to keep the beach clean and educate people about ocean conservation. So they have like all these activations on site, and it's a really big part of the festival to like go play games that teach you about shark conservation or turtle conservation, or like they give you like little things to put on the back of your phone to like put red light instead of white light for sea turtles and all of this like safety stuff. So like, and as Jen was saying, like back of house, like all the golf carts have that like film over the lights, and it kind of just plays into every aspect. So for that festival in particular, we did a lot of marketing around that, and we did a lot of like post festival, like this is how much we saved, or like this and this. But sometimes it's really hard to get those metrics, and it's really hard to track it. And I think that, to Jen's point, like in the past couple of years, people have been really, really on top of it because everyone cares a lot more. So it's been cool seeing that shift, because a lot of times we'll actually get data now where like we're able to at least say like, you know, we did this, we saved this much more than last year, like we're using this. And you know, Jen and a lot of other people in the festival industry know that there's also a lot of like costs that come with being really sustainable, and I think that that plays into it a lot as well. So yes and no from the marketing side.
For sure. Makes sense. So as I'm listening and being so impressed with your work and the things that you're doing, also recognizing that we have the privilege of two women working in this space, and it brings to mind, you know, of course, from the lens of Music Forward, with our own goals of diversifying the industry. How do you see any differences in how you approach your work as a woman in the field that you're in the industry? Do you find yourself being sort of the woman's voice in the spaces that you're in, or do you find that in the festival space that it's a pretty diverse, gender diverse teams that you're working with? Like, how do you approach your role from the perspective of being a woman in the music industry and working in festivals? Jen, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think when I first started, I was lucky. I had a couple of mentors that were female, but they're also the only females in leadership positions that I worked with for a long, long time. But they're really excellent examples, and helped really pave the way. But I think even though they were my mentor, we were all still sort of dealing with, as a minority in the room, there's a lot of pressure to be right all the time, and not as much bandwidth to be make errors. Moving forward, 20 plus years, I think that has changed. Most of our leadership team at GovBall is female, actually, and that shift was not intentional. I've had actually a lot of conversations about that. It wasn't an intentional shift. It was a shift that came along with, we're just looking for the most qualified person in the role, like who's great at this. And just slowly but surely, that, we ended up with a lot of, as it turns out, a lot of women in leadership roles, including our site director, and, stage managers, et cetera. Which are probably the roles that we're seeing women come into like last within the industry. We're still catching up. But it was pointed out to me that perhaps I had a subconscious that, because I was a woman, I was looking at women differently when I was when I was hiring. And that's probably true. And so, I think as we have more diverse people in leadership roles, we will then have more diverse teams, and that like trickle down continues to come and happen and happen and happen. Just, intentionally and also naturally, which is, that's great.
Nice. What about you, Kaj?
Definitely a mix of both. I've been lucky that I've had teams that were a very healthy mix of both. Like my first full-time role in this industry was on Warped Tour, and both my directors were female. And so that was a really awesome experience because I was on tour and there was a lot of like weird politics that go on when you're on tour, and there's just like so much to deal with. Especially when you're on the road for like 2 months and living with like 16 people for that whole period of time. So that was like super eye-opening. Definitely also showed like where people lie in the more male heavy roles, like Jen just said. I think in marketing in particular, there's a lot healthier of a mix now than there was a couple years ago. I definitely see a lot of females in like creative roles, but I will say like in the like content capture world, the video teams are like very heavily male. So I'm seeing like a lot of females trying to like break in, and I like always give my photographers like options to like try out video content just to see if they'll like it, because it usually is higher paying, and it's just I don't know, there's not like a reason why, but there's definitely like a boys club within the video world that you see a lot. And that's something that I'm like personally learning myself, because I want to kind of be a part of that and give other females opportunities there. So yeah, I think that perspective wise, it's a lot of just choosing the right people. The last agency that I was at before this role was primarily female. I think we had like 3 males on the team. So it was really great. And to Jen's point, that might be because I definitely hired a lot of females, but it was also that they had stronger resumes. So yeah, I think within the marketing space, it's a lot better than some of the more production roles that exist.
Roles. Yeah, definitely. Interesting. And so both of you kind of seeing some evolution, and to your points, depends on the space you're in and who you're working with. But I'm curious to hear from both of you specifically, like, was the end game always festivals, or when did the end game become festivals? Is this what has drawn you to working in this space, and how has your career sort of led you? Was it an intentional trajectory, or is like, oh, this seems cool, and I'm going to lean in here? Jen, can you get started?
Yeah, completely unintentional. I really wanted, when I was coming up, really my end goals, I wanted to be like a GM of a venue. And then after working in venues for a little bit, I was like, oh, this is great, but it's also consistent, and possibly too consistent for me, which is my nice way of not saying that I was bored. Because there's a lot of work that goes into venues, but I really liked that the creativity that went into festivals, fell into festivals working some freelance work. And was really one of the things that I loved was watching like the visual design teams interact with like the site teams, and that the creative people with the people that are we're here to use the heavy equipment, and that interaction. It was just I think it's a really unique space, and where those elements are constantly overlapping. And love building temporary things, even though it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears for several weeks, and then you tear it down pretty quickly after you're using it. But it's really exciting to see it every time, and redesign a multi-story structure, or have that opportunity to be creative over and over again, I think is what kept me in the festival space once I had a little taste of it.
What was your first role in the festival space?
Actually, I shuttle driver for staff, like staff transportation. It's a longer story, but Live Nation and Ticketmaster had merged, and so my division within the company was eliminated for a little bit. And that was when I was living in Boston, working for Live Nation up there and Don Law's office. And so started working freelance work, and those festivals were really starting to emerge. It's 2010. And there's a lot of opportunity in festivals, but I was new. And so after, 10 years of, working up the ladder, I sort of like went back down to the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, although every role at a festival is important, and I should say that twice. And so I took this job to drive the shuttle and said, like, we'll see who I meet. And the second day I think I was there, I met the festival director, and he asked me some questions about myself. And then he was like, oh, actually, we need some help over here. It sounds like you're qualified for that. Let's see if we can get someone else to jump in and drive a shuttle that has less experience. And the rest is history. That is exactly what happened. And yeah. And that's really like, in a lot of festivals in experience, there's a lot of temporary positions that might only be on site for 3 or 4 days. But you're going to meet people and learn from them. And I might be jumping ahead to other questions. But that's, we see even just on this past governor's ball, we had a brand new runner who's phenomenal. And that person is moving into the next show with us as a production coordinator. Like they, and excited to see that happen. But, that runner role is also really, really, really crucial.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I think there is that bigger question around network, but, and it's an underlying theme across the entire event today, like building that network and being open and finding your entry point, and then you take off from there. Kaj, what about you? How did you land in the festival space, and what keeps you in this space?
Yeah, I was like so confused when I was coming into the music industry on where I wanted to go. And then I lived out in LA for a little bit, worked in management, tried the whole like the artist side, and I was like, this is not it. Not it for me. So ended up working on Warped Tour, and that was a huge learning curve. I knew nothing about doing anything on site, and then went on like a massive touring festival, and it was bonkers, and I was exhausted, but I had a lot of fun. I did like 5 different jobs on the road, so I learned a lot really quick. And then from there, I just kind of like loved it. Like I think a big part of festivals and having that team where Jen talks about, your blood, sweat, and tears, and it's really intense, and then it's really beautiful and fun, is that you're really bonded with the people around you. So you have like your little festival family, and I really loved that. And I had really great mentors that just created really awesome spaces to be in. And it made it really fun. So as much as it was really stressful and you didn't get any sleep, it was also really fun and really rewarding to see like that fan experience come to life. And I was lucky in that sense that I ended up being on like a head production team because someone had quit right before the tour started. So, I just got to experience that. And then after that, I almost moved to Australia because I couldn't get a job in the festival world because it was really hard post college. So I was just like, I'm gonna move to like Australia, like network out there and just like freelance and do whatever. And then I ended up landing a job in Nashville that was like independent festival marketing, and did that for a really long time. Loved it, but was feeling a little stagnant. So then switched over to Goldenvoice, and now it's weird because I don't actually work on a ton of festival stuff. Like I do a little bit, but it's not my primary. I work on the venue side a lot now. And then again, we have Portola Music Festival, so that's kind of an all hands on deck for our team. Our team's pretty small up here. There's only like 6 of us. So yeah, and then Goldenvoice is awesome in that you have a lot of opportunity to work on things. Like I got to work on Kaajal this year, and there's just so many components that you can kind of dip your hands into.
Nice. And I think if I'm recapping a little bit here and creating moments of inspiration, it's just being willing to do whatever the thing is that keeps you close to the thing that you're passionate about, connecting, being curious, and trying even when you're not quite sure that it's the right thing for yourself. I think those, we oftentimes think of where we want to go, and we forget that there's beauty in the journey, and how you get there can be very individual for you, but it's really about putting yourself out there and being in the right spaces. We are getting close, and there are some questions in the chat, so I'm going to pivot a little bit because I want to get to as many of these as possible. Oh, we've got a few. Okay. For some of you, I'm gonna adjust your questions just a little bit. So, Gabriella is wondering about it's a dream to work at GovBall, and so what are the best ways? What are the best entry points? And I think that this could be for both of you for sure. But what are the best entry points for somebody without any experience or limited experience to find a position working in festivals? Do you want to start us, Jen?
Sure. There's really no bad entry point. I think, if you have an opportunity to work on a festival, and you can learn something and get to know some folks, there's no wrong direction. I think a lot of people come into festivals, and we've had this happen a lot actually, with a handful of interns, etc., because they've been to a festival and so they think a festival is fun, and so then they want to work at a festival. And I think the best way to figure out if a festival really is for you is to work at a festival. And there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I didn't think it'd be like this. Because it is really hard work and long days, and you're outside regardless of whether it's raining or whatever's happening. And there's a lot of that maybe less sexy work that happens that is essential. And so really, I think almost any position at a festival, you're going to look around and see that, and then think about what your own natural curiosity is, and what your goals are, and then you can focus on that department. But just having the visibility into the inner workings of a festival is, I don't think there's a wrong way. I also think, one thing I'll mention is, and Kaaj said this earlier, her team is small. Our team is also really small. So Founders as a full-time team, there's 11 of us that work on the show year round. And that includes our two of our owners. So then if you talk about a team of 9, and then 3 of them are in sponsorship and 2 of them are in marketing, and then that leaves 2 of us that aren't, or 3 of us that aren't. My math won't get off there. And so a lot of our core team, are freelancers or come from other companies that we work with temporarily throughout the year. And so there's also opportunity to work with festivals, but through those vendors. And so even looking at what are vendors that work in the festival space, if not direct to Governor's Ball, because, our team of 11 is going to remain small. But those vendors might be doing, 10 festivals and, within their, or festivals and other types of events. And so that's also another path. And I've been talking a lot about that with actually one of our coalition mentees this year is, was interested in stage production and ended up working and doing an internship, not with a festival, but with an audio company. And then that brought her to festivals.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's a lot of contractors that are coming in to make those festivals happen. So it's worth doing your homework and understanding where opportunity might lie. And it could be seasonal and part-time and very temporary, but it gets the ball rolling and it gets you to that network. And you could be driving the shuttle and then doing production work the next day. You just don't know where things are going to take you. Kaaj, I've got one for you. Can you give us any examples of a mutually beneficial partnership that enhanced a festival experience from the marketing side? What have been some of the best partnerships that you've seen come together?
That's a good question. We have a lot of sponsors that are amazing, that are super valuable at any festival. Something that I saw recently that I personally loved was one of the country festivals I worked on partnered with Ranch Hand Cowboys, which are male dancers. And they put on a show at the main stage, and it was just the best thing ever. Everyone had so much fun. It was it was just like something, it was a festival in Wisconsin, so like they don't have access to that. It's not like Nashville. They don't have the like Broadway kind of crazy vibe. So we brought that to the festival and it was really cool and everyone loved it. And it was cool to like see that. And they obviously got a ton of exposure as well. And so yeah, that was a really fun partnership.
I love that. Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions. We're a little over, but I would like to give a final question to each of you. If you were going to give one piece of advice to somebody that's curious and interested in a similar pathway or a similar career that you have, what would that advice be to them? Kaj, why don't you get us started?
Yeah. I think two things. A, be really nice to everyone you meet. Like, you're gonna be stressed out in this industry. It's a given. And if you're not good at dealing with that, then, you know, it might be a good idea to consider other career paths because that's just kind of a given. And I think part of growing in this industry is learning how to manage that stress and having a work-life balance and all of that. And it's totally doable. But sometimes people forget that everyone has a life and everyone has things going on because we're so focused on putting an event on and we're all really stressed. So I think that's my big thing, is to just be grateful and kind and take any job. Like, my first boss in the industry was a person who will like do anything from hanging out posters when it's 100 degrees out to like managing a team of like 50 people on the marketing side. So, you know, I don't think it's wise to like shy away from any job. And that kind of plays into what Jen was saying earlier, where there's not really a bad job out there.
Nice. Thank you, Kaj. What about you, Jen? Do you have some advice for someone interested in a similar career path? It's such an interesting pathway. I think I'm minimizing it, but what advice would you have for someone that's interested in getting into the event space, festival space?
Yeah, I think a wide range of experience. You know, if you're able to, you know, be open to working in different places, so you can continue learning. You know, one of I think the assets that I bring as a festival director is, you know, the first 10 years of my career working in venues. You know, I worked in a box office, I worked in the merch stand, I worked with, you know, in concessions, I did even in college radio station internships. And, you know, at a festival, and especially as a festival director, we're making a lot of decisions and we're sort of the tiebreaker often. And so that perspective of understanding, like, this might seem really minimal to this department, but really important to this department. And I think I can often have a perspective of and weighing those because I've worked in every, you know, pretty much every department on site I've worked in at some point prior to being in the leadership position. And so, you know, to have that wide range of experience is just an asset that I truly like lean on every day. Even as, you know, I maybe get farther away from ticketing, it's easier for me to jump back in to be like, you know, what are the nitty gritties here? Okay. And, oh, this is because I have that, you know, that basis. And it, you know, I think it also makes you more relatable to all of your employees and what they're going through. So, you know, if you're able to do a variety and wide range of internships or jobs, I think that's, you know, that's valuable to festivals because there's such a wide range of things happening at festivals.
I think that's really solid advice. Well, I would love to continue this conversation. As always, I feel like we barely scratched the surface and it's time to wrap up. Thank you, Jen and Kaj, so much for sharing with us. We really appreciate the insights.